And Mr. Speaker, I had made reference to an organization called the Task Force, which is to be established under Section 34, Clauses 34 and following. And the composition is interesting. At Clause 36(1), the task force shall comprise the Attorney General, the ministers responsible for finance, foreign affairs, family and gender affairs, national security, social development, social security, labor, and legal affairs. As currently constituted, that's 5 ministers, including the Prime Minister, who is the Minister of Finance and Minister of National Security and Minister of Legal Affairs, and there's the Honorable Attorney General and the other ministers. And then it goes on to say, the task force shall comprise other appropriate senior government officials, including officials with responsibility for law enforcement, immigration, social development, foreign affairs, labor, justice, and appropriate non-governmental organizations and other persons with the relevant expertise, who shall be appointed by the Cabinet and who shall hold office for 2 years, but may be eligible for reappointment. And it goes on to say in Clause 38(1), the task force shall regulate its own procedure and shall meet at least once a quarter and at such times as may be expedient or necessary, and at such times and such days as the task force may determine, and the Cabinet would select a chairperson. Now, and the functions of this task force are defined. It covers the whole gamut of issues relating to trafficking in persons. Mr. Speaker, why I identify this task force is because it is going to play a critical role in the implementation of this act. Very often, organizations are listed in statutes to help the implementation of a statute, but they are not central to the statute. The task force here is central to the statute. By comparison, I will say this. Anyone who reads the Misuse of Drugs Act would see that there's an advisory committee on the abuse and the misuse of drugs. But the advisory committee hardly functions, whether under the previous government or under this government. It is not central to the operation of that act, but important nevertheless, because it can provide a series of services to touch real human beings. Similarly, we've just had an experience. We spent a lot of time today. The Minister of Agriculture went to lengths to speak about the deficiencies by public servants relating to the preparation of relevant documents for the ordering of, in layman terms, the oil for the spraying, because they had already the chemicals. And this pretext is the oil, which is what really, you mix it with the chemicals, you mix it with what in human terms you may call the medicaments, the pharmaceuticals. And the reason why you mix that is to be able to spray it properly, and the spray text stays on the banana leaves. That's why the oil is so important. That they drag their feet for 6, 8 weeks, whatever the time he said, and talk with the public servants, and the relevant ones who keep in telling their superiors that we have done the work, when in fact they had not done it. And the minister himself had to go to the Ministry of Finance officials to say, what is happening here? And then a simple bill, which is there several months, almost a year to pay for the plane, for the requirements for the plane to go up, some formal requirements, $12,000, a small sum of money. That they had that and didn't deal with it. The officials, people who are enjoined by virtue of their professionalism. I'm not even talking about the civil service orders, to do their work. But something is in the act, the Banana Industry Act, which we passed here. And this is where I'm coming, which speaks about an advisory committee, a consultative committee, which includes the public servants and farmers' organizations. Clearly, if that institution, which we agreed here, should be part of the Banana Industry Act as a matter of policy and also of law, had been operating, it is likely that the bureaucratic deficiencies by the public servants would have been identified earlier. So that when we make the policy and we pass the law, they're not just words. Here I would say, if I may just add parenthetically, the minister has said that that committee has subsequently been activated, and he gave what reports they, what conclusions and recommendations they have made to prevent things like that happening in the future. And I listened very carefully to what the minister had to say. In other words, the act in that regard, the law has now been operationalized. But a challenge caused that. It should have been in operation all the time. And it was the duty of the public servants to ensure that that is so. Now, in this case, the burden is put on the cabinet of this country. This is not now an issue for public servants. This is an issue now for the cabinet to name the chairman and 5 ministers of government, including the Honorable Attorney General, a series of public servants, and NGO personnel and other individuals. So this task force is vital for the operation of this act. It's not tangential. And I make the point and repeat it, that in the structure of the act of this statute is not something advisory in the case of the advisory body in the Misuse of Drugs Act, or indeed advisory consultative in the Banana Industry Act. Though we see now the importance of that particular policy decision and the law which followed in the Banana Industry Act. And here, I considered it my duty as the person who has the carriage of this bill to point out the significance of these aspects to address the question which has been raised here regarding implementation. And finally, resources have to be put to this. We may be able to draw on other existing resources and be creative. But clearly, for a focal point, some additional resources have got to be provided to have the chairman must have, the chairman of the task force must have a secretariat. It may well be one person in the public service who has to be the secretary of this body, the task force, and to be following and to be carrying out their work, in addition to focal points in the police force and As an operational matter, the Commissioner of Police will have to form an important, either a unit by itself or a cluster of individuals in the police force who would be charged with this as part of their central responsibilities. Not necessarily their only responsibilities, because it's a police force of 800 persons, but as part of their central responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, I think I've spoken enough in winding up. I didn't want earlier to say any of these things. I wanted to see how the debate went and to pull things together as to see what are concerns of members of this House so that I can reply to them and to give them some focus and direction. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill for an act to give effect and to implement the protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, and to provide for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto, be read a third time by title and passed. So moved.